Trump is now claiming that he has, quote, all the time in the world, and is declining to give a new timeline on when the war could end.
How long are you willing to wait until you get a unified response?
I've been doing this for 6 weeks, and the military is totally defeated. So right now, I don't want to rush it because you guys are, trying to make us look as bad as possible. I don't want to rush it. I want to take my time. We have plenty of time.
You might remember that Trump initially said this about the timeline.
And we have, right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks.
To be clear, the war is now entering its 9th week. And yesterday, even with an extended ceasefire, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the United States will continue its blockade on Iranian ports for, quote, as long as it takes, and also backed up Trump's ever-shifting strategy.
Not only is the blockade growing, in fact, a second aircraft carrier will join the blockade in just a few days, but this growing blockade is also gone global. President Trump said it again yesterday. We have all the time in the world, and we're not anxious for a deal. And I hear him say it every day in private as well.
But behind closed doors, Trump's own team is struggling to keep up with his whiplash messaging. My MS Now colleagues, including the great Jackie Alemany, report that the resulting political maneuvering has left some of his top aides, quote, fatigued, and others trying to change the subject altogether, according to one current and one former White House official. Yeah, I bet they're fatigued. They're not the only ones whiplash.
I too am fatigued.
I am fatigued. In the moment I heard him say, I have all the time in the world, I'm a James Bond fan, I immediately went to the song We Have All the Time in the World from Her Majesty's Secret Service. Yeah. Like, no, Mr. President, we do not have all the time in the world, especially when he said, oh, this will be about 4 to 6 weeks. We're in week 9, Jackie.
I love the way Jonathan's brain works. And I, for one, am feeling fantastic this morning. Not fatigued at all, shockingly.
No.
But it was, basically the strategy that seems to be taking place here is the Trump administration waiting for Iran to blink first. Right. And that is why you are seeing a complete shift in the tone and the posture that the White House has taken when it comes to the patience that they're now giving Iran. When the president called me on Thursday morning, I believe it was.
Just wanted y'all to hear that again.
Yes, he called
Our girl
you.
Jackie Alemany is that much of a reporter that the man saw her on television and had to say something to her. Go ahead.
But it was helpful timing because I was able to ask him quickly, when are in-person negotiations going to resume? Remember, on Sunday, we were reporting that there were some people that were set to go to Islamabad. That never happened. J.D. Vance suddenly showed up at the White House on Tuesday. We thought he was going to be flying back to Pakistan. He said that they were essentially waiting for Iran to get their leadership together. He said no one, I believe the direct quote was, no one in the country knows who the hell is speaking for the country. That, according to our colleague David Rode, who did a quick fact check with a bunch of experts, is essentially incorrect, that there has been no regime change. The power structure remains the same, just with different figures, and that what Iran wants is for the U.S. to drop the blockade. Then they're willing to come to the negotiating table again. But obviously, the blockade is working to some extent, as these negotiations are going to resume this weekend now with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. But there's definitely mixed feelings internally about the president's messaging strategy around the war.
I don't think it's a strategy. And I know what you mean, like his messaging, whatever that he's doing, like his messaging. But I feel like we spent so much time over the last 10 years with a lot of Republicans trying to convince us that Donald Trump is playing 4D chess, and I don't think he is. I don't think he is. When you talk to people who worked with him in New York real estate, when you read Maggie Haberman's book, The Confidence Man, that talks about a lot of this and his upbringing in the real estate business, like, He's just going by gut instinct. And when you're the president of the United States, with all the access to all the things,
all the information,
there's no person on earth that could have more access to information if they wanted to, more access to the smartest people on the planet, more access to the most strategic minds on the planet than the president of the United States. And this one just is choosing not to use them. He's just choosing not to use any of those resources that he has. And the American people are suffering because of it. The people of Iran are suffering because of it. Our allies, the world, global economy. There is no one who's benefiting from this.
You know, the way I'm looking at this, it seems to me like the president thinks he can close a diplomatic deal the way he closes a real estate deal. And as he's discovering in week 9 that the two worlds do not mesh.
The White House correspondent at Bloomberg News and Alan Ayer, longtime Iran expert for the U.S. government and a key member of the U.S. nuclear negotiating team for the 2015 nuclear agreement with Iran. He is now a distinguished diplomatic fellow with the Middle East Institute. And a lot of jobs are you and Marco Rubio. There was so much in there to pick from. We were reacting in real time as we were hearing from Enza Mom. But I want to start with playing a SOT mash of things that President Trump has said about a deal being close over and over and over again. Listen to this.
Maybe we're going to make a deal. You're going to be finding out over the next probably 10 days. Well, we're going to make a deal, or we're going to get a deal one way or the other.
And you said today 10 days. Give them a deadline firm to make a deal?
I would think that would be enough time, 10, 15 days, pretty much maximum.
Sir, could you foresee a deal in Iran this upcoming week?
I do see a deal in Iran, yeah.
Mr. President.
Could be soon. This process should go very quickly, and that most of the points are already negotiated and agreed to.
Those dates, February 19th, March 29th, April 17th. Today is April 25th. We are still in the war and the negotiations aren't happening. Alan, help me understand, if the United States is not negotiating with the people who can actually make the decisions this far in the game, how can we actually think that there is going to be a deal anytime soon?
Well, I think a lot of the ambient stress comes from you listening to President Trump and believing what he says.
Well, don't do that.
Yeah. He's either trying to scare the Iranians or calm the markets. And when the U.S. administration says, well, we don't know who we're talking to in Iran or who's running Iran, that's wrong. We've got 21 intelligence agencies with a multi-billion-dollar budget. I'm hoping we have a pretty good feel. What he's trying to do is put the ball in the Iranian court, like, well, when they get their act together, then we'll be ready. Or we're going to Islamabad to hear what the Iranians say about our demands. So, again, you got to take everything he says with a...
But what's the point of even sending Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff to Pakistan if they're not going to be meeting with the Iranians? And they could just have a Zoom call with the Pakistanis, and they could go to and talk to the Iranians from, because that's what's happening, running room to room. It's basically that.
And not even the top officials from Iran.
Right.
Why is the United States sending its two top negotiators, Trump's two top negotiators, when they're basically going to Islamabad to talk to Iranian staff through Pakistan?
Yeah, but they did talks with mediators before. The whole time before the two wars, they were talking through the Omanis, more or less, with the Iranians. There was never direct talks because the Iranians didn't want direct talks. So this is a reversion back to the way it used to be. And again, Arabchi is a top negotiator. He's not chump change, right? So J.D. Vance isn't going, but that's not a big deal. It's not personalities. It's what the proposals are. If there's any movement between what we said formally and what we said now, what they said formally, what they said now. So don't get wrapped up in who's going, who's not going. To an extent, it's irrelevant. It's just a question of both sides checking in. And you're right, it could to an extent be done over the phone, but it's good to do it in person because it adds a little more sort of pressure to the situation, I think.
My take is similar to yours. I agree that it's a relatively positive development because the big issue here is sort of the trust issue, right? It all stems from the Iranians feeling like before we went to war that negotiations in Geneva were going great. And the very next day after J.D. Vance and others went on television to basically say that negotiations were progressing, they decided to commence this war with the Israelis. And I think rebuilding that trust is something that has been important to the administration. But, Kate, I'm wondering, You spoke with the president about this last week, who claimed that there were actually agreements that the Iranians and the U.S. had come to, but it seems like this week that actually hasn't materialized. And when you're looking bullet by bullet point at the list of demands, they're actually still quite in contradiction with one another. But what are you hearing on sort of that status update on where the actual specifics of the negotiations for a longer-term deal stand?
Yeah, well, it's tough, right? Because there are so many mixed messages, and you're hearing one thing from the president, and he's doing all these phone calls with reporters. I know you spoke to him as well on the phone. And what he told me about a week ago was that, you know, he said that he was not going to release any frozen Iranian funds at all, full stop. I asked if he was thinking about there were reports about this maybe a $20 billion freeze. He said, no, that's not happening. He also told me that the Iranians had agreed to suspend their nuclear program indefinitely. And I asked specifically, you know, there's been reporting that Vance had offered a 20-year suspension, that the Iranians were not. They did not like that. They countered with fewer years. And he said, no years, unlimited. But then shortly after that, the Iranians just contradict. They said, we did not agree to any of that. And so I think it's really it's really hard to keep straight exactly what is going on. You know, the White House keeps saying that the public, the messaging is very different from the private conversation. So I'm curious this weekend, you know, what are those through mediators and maybe on the ground there, and if there might end up being an opportunity for direct talks, just what those conversations actually look like, because there's so much flying around right now, as you all know.
Alan, for reporters who are on the loop-de-loop, and the people in D.C. who are on the loop-de-loop, paying attention and trying to gauge what is true that Donald Trump is saying, and with Witkoff and Jared going and trying to dig through all and sift through all of that information, as someone who's done this before, literally the last time we had to deal with Iran when it comes to this, what are the actual things that tell you where we stand, and what should we be focusing on?
Well, in terms of the upcoming meeting, if they come out and say there's going to be a third meeting, because at this point you're obviously not going to solve it in one meeting. So what you want to do is you want to start a process, because you're not going to be able to solve this like speed dating, you know, where you drop in Islamabad and you talk for a couple hours and you find some sort of ingenious solution. It's a long, hard slog, and both sides have to commit to that long, hard slog. Neither side is yet. Neither side, and again, things are usually what they seem, neither side wants to negotiate. Okay? That's the reality. The parameters of a nuclear deal are the same as they were when Trump first became president. Restrictions on nuclear in exchange for ease of less sanctions, fewer sanctions, or some other revenue stream. That hasn't changed. But now you've got the Strait of Hormuz issue, which, as we all know, is a ticking time bomb that makes reaching a solution far more exigent.